A child invisible to the world makes an unexpected gesture that forever changes the fate of a powerful man. Who could have imagined what would happen next? The sun rose slowly over the damp streets of Boston, painting the historic buildings and the waters of the Charles River gold. It was another morning like so many others for David, a 12-year-old boy who already carried the weight of a difficult life on his shoulders. Barefoot and wearing a faded t-shirt that clung to his thin body, he walked along the downtown sidewalks, eyes alert for anything that could be collected, sold, or traded. On that February morning, the heat was suffocating. Even at 7 o'clock, David had already found 3 aluminum cans and a piece of copper wire abandoned near a construction site. He carefully stored everything in the plastic bag tied around his waist. Each item meant some change, and change meant food. "Good morning, Mr. Manuel," he greeted as he passed the newspaper stand on the corner of Dawn Street. The newspaper vendor, an older man with grey hair and kind eyes, was one of the few who really saw David. "Good morning, young man. Here, this was left over from yesterday." Manuel offered half a buttered roll and a cup of coffee with milk. David accepted with a genuine smile, the kind that only children can offer, even when life gives them no reason to smile. With a less empty stomach, David continued on his way. He knew every alley, every corner of that part of Boston like the back of his hand. He knew where to find shelter when it rained, where to get clean water, and which people were trustworthy. He had learned too early about survival in a world that seemed determined not to see him. He was close to Faneuil Market when something unusual caught his attention. A man in a navy blue suit, appearing about 50 years old, was staggering on the sidewalk. His reddened face and hands at his throat suggested something was very wrong. People rushed past, some looking away, others casting quick glances of concern, but no one stopped. David hesitated for a moment. Approaching strangers, especially well-dressed ones, could mean trouble. He had been accused of attempting theft, of being a nuisance, of existing where he shouldn't. But something in that man's desperation made him stop. "Are you feeling sick, mister?" The man couldn't answer. His wide eyes begged for help as he unsuccessfully tried to breathe. David recognized the signs. Weeks earlier, he had found a broken cell phone in the trash near the mall. The screen was cracked, but it worked. He spent days exploring the device, until the battery died, and one of the videos he watched showed how to help someone who was choking. Without thinking twice, David positioned himself behind the man. It was difficult to reach him due to the height difference, but determination made up for his size. With his arms around the stranger's waist, he squeezed with all the strength he could muster. "It's going to work, it's going to work," he repeated, to himself. On the third attempt, the man's body lurched forward and something came out of his throat. Immediately afterward, as if all energy had left him, he collapsed to the ground. David knelt beside him, placing a hand on his chest to check if he was still breathing. "Somebody call for help," he shouted, his childish voice echoing in the now busier street. A woman in a white lab coat who was passing by rushed over. "I'm a nurse." "What happened?" "He was choking. I did that thing where you squeeze the stomach. I think he fainted afterward," David explained, moving back slightly to give her space. The nurse checked the man's vital signs. "You performed the Heimlich maneuver. Where did you learn that?" "In a video on a cell phone," David replied, suddenly feeling unsure if he had done the right thing. "You saved his life," she stated with a quick smile as she tried to revive the man. A small crowd began to form around them. Someone mentioned that an ambulance had been called. Others speculated about who the unconscious man might be. David remained there, sitting on the sidewalk, watching, feeling both important and invisible. It wasn't long before a police car arrived, closely followed by an official-looking black car. 2 police officers quickly got out, clearing a path through the onlookers. "Step back, please," ordered the taller one. The other officer approached David, looking at him suspiciously. "What were you doing with this man, kid?" "I helped him. He was choking," David replied, standing up. "Helped him how?" the officer questioned, moving closer. "Intimidating. I did that thing where you squeeze the stomach, you know. The lady over there said it's called the maneuver of something." The officer looked at the nurse, who nodded her head, while continuing to monitor the unconscious man. "It's true, officer. The boy performed the Heimlich maneuver. He probably saved this gentleman's life." At this moment, two men in suits got out of the black car and quickly headed to the scene. One of them knelt beside the unconscious man, checking his condition. "It's him all right, Dr. Simon. It's Mr. Barrett," he confirmed to the other man, an older gentleman with grey hair and thin-framed glasses. "Let's take him to the clinic immediately," ordered the doctor, gesturing for his assistants to bring a stretcher. "What happened?" "Apparently he choked. The boy here performed the Heimlich maneuver and saved him," explained the nurse. Dr. Simon briefly looked at David with an expression that mixed surprise and something the boy couldn't identify. He quickly looked away and returned his attention to the patient. "We need to transport him now. We need to check if there was any brain damage from lack of oxygen." As the medical team transferred the man to the stretcher, the officer turned his attention back to David. "Do you have ID, kid? Anyone responsible for you?" David swallowed hard. He knew what happened to boys like him when the police decided to help. "I'm going to meet my aunt at the market," he lied, starting to back away. "Hey, wait!" The officer grabbed his arm firmly. "I think you'd better come with us to the station. We need to verify a few things." "But I didn't do anything." "Wrong," protested David, feeling fear growing inside him. "It's just procedure. If everything's in order, you'll be released soon," the officer replied, leading him toward the police car. David looked one last time at the man he had saved, now being placed in a private ambulance. No one seemed to care what was happening to him. It was as if, having fulfilled his unexpected role as a hero, he returned to his usual invisibility. Inside the police car, as the streets of Boston passed by the window, David felt a tightness in his chest. "I did the right thing, and yet I'm being taken away like a criminal," he thought. It wasn't the first time the world had taught him this cruel lesson. For some, no matter what they did, they would always be viewed with suspicion. Edward Barrett opened his eyes slowly, the excessive brightness making him blink several times. The white ceiling, the smell of disinfectant, and the rhythmic sound of machines indicated he was in a hospital. Or rather, given the sophisticated decor and the almost absolute silence, probably at St. Vincent's Clinic, where he had been a VIP patient for years. "Welcome back, Mr. Barrett," said a gentle female voice. Edward turned his face with effort. A middle-aged nurse was adjusting the IV connected to his arm. "What happened?" he asked, his voice hoarse and his throat sore. "You had a choking episode followed by syncope. You've been in the clinic for 2 days, but your vital signs are—" "Excellent. Dr. Simon will examine you shortly." Edward tried to organize his thoughts. He remembered walking downtown after a meeting with suppliers from Boston Harbor. He had stopped to eat a pastry. After that, only confused flashes. Small, rough hands. A very young face, with frightened but determined eyes. A sensation of suffocating, followed by relief and then darkness. "How did I get here?" The nurse smiled, checking the chart at the foot of the bed. "A driver passing by recognized you and alerted our emergency team. You were very lucky." This didn't seem right. Edward was sure there was no driver. He was about to question it when the door opened and Dr. Simon Ventura entered, followed by 2 assistants. "Edward, my friend, what a scare you gave us," exclaimed the doctor, approaching with a professional yet warm smile. Tall, with perfectly groomed grey hair and thin-framed glasses, Simon was the personification of medical confidence. "Simon, what happened to me?" "Her piece of food completely blocked your airway. You were lucky to be helped in time," explained the doctor, examining his pupils with a small flashlight. "We ran some tests while you were unconscious. Your heart is excellent, lungs clear. The CT scan didn't show any cerebral sequelae from the momentary lack of oxygen." Edward frowned, trying to connect the fragments of memory. "I remember someone helping me, someone small." Dr. Simon exchanged a quick glance with his team. "That must be mental confusion from hypoxia. The driver who helped you is a middle-aged man. We've identified him and thanked him for his prompt assistance." "I want to talk to him," insisted Edward. Of course. As soon as you're more recovered, we'll arrange contact. Now you need to rest." In the 2 days that followed, Edward received several visitors. His secretary, Louise, brought urgent documents that needed signing. Some company executives came to show concern, but mainly to ensure they were keeping everything under control. His ex-wife, Christine, with whom he maintained a cordial relationship after the divorce, brought flowers and a genuine expression of relief. No one, however, mentioned the supposed driver. Whenever Edward asked, he received vague responses or promises that they would find him soon. On the morning of the third day, feeling considerably better, Edward decided to investigate on his own. He waited for the shift change and approached a nursing assistant he hadn't seen before, a young woman of timid appearance. "Good morning. Denise," he said, reading her badge. "Can you do me a favor? I need to see the admission records from the day I arrived here." The young woman hesitated. "Mr. Barrett, I don't have authorization for that. Please, I just want to understand what happened to me. I have memory flashes that don't make sense with what they're telling me." Denise bit her lip, looking at the door as if fearing being observed. "I don't understand some things either," she whispered. "I was there when they brought you in. There was no driver at all." Edward sat up straighter in bed. "What did you see?" "I only heard the paramedics commenting that a street boy had performed the Heimlich maneuver and saved you. But afterward, Dr. Simon gave explicit orders not to mention it. They said the boy was taken away by the police." A chill ran down Edward's spine. The fragmented images in his memory began to make sense. A boy. How old? "I'm not sure exactly. Maybe 12. 13 years old." Edward closed his eyes for a moment, the small hands, the young face. It wasn't delirium caused by lack of oxygen, it was real. "I need to find him. Do you know where they took him?" "No, sir, but—" She hesitated again, then decided to continue. "This isn't the first time. I've overheard conversations about how Dr. Simon has contacts to clean up the areas near the clinic. He says high-standard patients shouldn't feel uncomfortable when arriving here." Edward felt a wave of indignation. Clean up meant removing vulnerable people as if they were unwanted objects, dirt to be swept away from privileged views. "Thank you, Denise. This stays between us." She nodded, relieved, and quickly left the room. That afternoon, Edward insisted on being discharged, contrary to medical recommendations to stay another day for observation. Dr. Simon tried to dissuade him, mentioning risks of relapse and the need for more tests. But Edward was adamant. "I have urgent business to attend to, Simon. I'll sign any necessary waiver of responsibility." While preparing to leave, he received a visit from Christine. "Are you sure about this, Edward? You still look pale," she commented, helping him organize his belongings. "I've never been more certain," he replied, determined not to share his suspicions until he had concrete evidence. "I need to resolve an important matter, something related to the company, something related to doing the right thing." Christine smiled. She knew that tone well. It was the same one Edward used when deciding to confront dishonest competitors or corrupt politicians who tried to extort his companies. "Can I help in any way?" Edward considered the offer. Christine was an investigative journalist, known for reports on social inequality and urban problems. He might need her later, but for now, he preferred to investigate discreetly. "Perhaps soon. For now, I need to verify some things on my own." Already in the car, being driven by his personal driver Joshua, Edward made a call to Ralph Mendoza, head of security for his companies and a former civilian police officer. "Ralph, I need an urgent and confidential favor. I want information about a street boy who was detained by the police 3 days ago, near Faneuil Market. Approximately 12 years old, falsely accused. I can check with my contacts in the police, Mr. Barrett. Any specific reason?" "He saved my life, and I think he's being punished for it." There was a brief silence on the line. "I understand. I'll begin the search immediately." Edward hung up, looking out the car window at the streets of Boston passing by. The city he had helped develop with his investments in port infrastructure hid realities that he, from his office in the tall corporate building or from his mansion in the Good Harbor neighborhood, rarely saw up close. Joshua changed the route. "I want to pass by Faneuil Market." "Sir, the doctor recommended rest." "Mamo, just do as I asked, please." The driver nodded, changing direction. Edward leaned back in his seat, determined. If there really was a boy who had risked everything to save him while adults passed by indifferently, he needed to find him, not just out of gratitude, but because something about this whole story deeply disturbed him. If Dr. Simon really operated a scheme to keep vulnerable people away from his rich patient's sight, using contacts in the police and public agencies, that went against everything Edward valued. And if there was one thing Edward Barrett did not tolerate, it was injustice, especially when he had the power to fight it. "I'll find him," he murmured to himself as the car advanced toward the historic center of Boston. "Whatever your name is, I'll find you." The New Dawn Institution was almost 2 hours from Boston, in a rural area difficult to access. Surrounded by an extensive cornfield, the renovated old mansion housed about 40 children and adolescents, most transferred from overcrowded urban shelters. David looked out the dormitory window, watching the fine rain falling on the green field. 5 days had passed since he had been taken from the police station to a municipal shelter, and from there hastily transferred to that isolated place. No one had explained the reason to him. When he asked, he received only evasive answers. Thinking about running away again. The voice of Tyler, a 15-year-old boy with a scar on his eyebrow, pulled David from his thoughts. In the first days, he had tried to escape twice. The first time he was found after walking for hours without finding anything but cornfields. The second time, he reached a small village, but was quickly recognized and returned. "I don't know if it's worth it. I don't have anywhere to go anyway," David replied without taking his eyes off the landscape. "It's better here than on the streets, man. At least there's food and a bed." David sighed. It was true. The material conditions were better than his life in Boston. But the feeling of being imprisoned, of having been sent far away without justification, deeply bothered him. "I just wanted to understand why they brought me so far away." Tyler shrugged. "They always do that when they want to hide someone." The phrase echoed in David's head all day. During the improvised classes, while the volunteer teacher explained fractions, he wondered, who would want to hide him, and why? He perfectly remembered the man he had saved, the doctor who arrived later, the police officers. Something in the looks exchanged between them now disturbed him, as if there had been a silent conversation from which he was excluded. In Boston, Edward Barrett was in his office on the 20th floor of a commercial building overlooking the sea. Through the large glass windows, he could see ships coming in and out of the harbor, many of them transporting cargo from his companies. Normally, that view brought him satisfaction, a tangible reminder of everything he had built over decades. Today, however, he hardly noticed the landscape. "So what did you find out?" he asked as soon as Ralph Mendoza entered the room. The former police officer, a 40-year-old black man with military posture, placed a folder on the desk. "The boy's name is David Smith, 12 years old, no record of a father. The mother died 3 years ago. He's been living on the street since then with no known relatives." Edward leafed through the report, which included a low-quality black-and-white photo, probably extracted from some registration system. The police detained him for suspicious behavior that day, a standard procedure when it comes to minors. "In street situations," continued Ralph with evident discomfort, "he was referred to Child Protective Services and then to the Children's Haven Municipal Shelter. And then? Here begins the strange part. Less than 24 hours after arriving at the shelter, he was transferred to a rural institution called New Dawn, about 120 kilometers from here." Edward frowned. "Under what justification?" "Officially, for better care and social reintegration. But my contacts say there was a call from the Secretary of Social Assistance recommending the transfer urgently. The request came from someone with influence." Edward leaned back in his chair, connecting the dots. "Dr. Simon Ventura?" Ralph hesitated before answering. "I couldn't confirm, but there are rumors that Dr. Ventura maintains a close relationship with several local politicians. He's funded campaigns, offers VIP treatment for family members, the kind of favor that generates important debts." "And this New Dawn place? What kind of place is it?" "A private institution that receives public funds. On paper, it seems legitimate. psychological care, schooling, recreational activities, but it's extremely isolated, and there are reports that children who cause problems in urban shelters are sent there. Edward stood up, walking to the window. His reflection in the glass showed a middle-aged man with a determined expression. "I want to visit this place." "It's not that simple, Mr. Barrett. You'd need judicial authorization or to be a relative of the child. Then find a way. Use contacts, resources, whatever is necessary. I want to see this place with my own eyes and talk to the boy." Ralph nodded, understanding his boss's determination. "There's another thing I discovered," he added, handing over more documents. "I researched the pattern of transfers to this institution over the last 2 years. I noticed something curious. Several minors in street situations were sent there after being found in the vicinity of St. Vincent's Clinic." Edward felt a shiver. His suspicions were being confirmed. "Simon is cleaning the area around his luxury clinic, using political influence to remove these children from his rich patient's sight," he concluded, his voice laden with indignation. "It seems so, and from what I understand, it's not just with children. Adults in street situations are also removed, usually with aggressive police approaches, and taken to distant shelters or even to other municipalities." Edward slammed his fist on the desk, making the coffee cup tremble. "This is inhumane. These people are not trash to be swept under the rug. You know how it works, unfortunately. For many, the image of prosperity and cleanliness is worth more than human dignity." Edward took a deep breath, trying to control his anger. "We're going to change that, Ralph, starting with finding David and bringing him back." Meanwhile, at New Dawn, David reluctantly participated in a group therapy session. The psychologist, Dr. Regina, was a young woman with a gentle face and calm voice. She seemed genuinely interested in helping, unlike some staff members who treated the children as mere numbers on a spreadsheet. "Today we're going to talk about hopes and dreams," she announced, sitting in a circle with 8 children. "Who wants to start by sharing a dream for the future?" An uncomfortable silence followed the question. For many there, the future was an abstract concept, almost a provocation. When you fight daily for survival, dreaming seems like an inaccessible luxury. "I want to be a soccer player," Matthew finally said, a 10-year-old boy. "That's great, Matthew. Do you have a favorite team?" "Boston United," he answered with a shy smile. The conversation flowed from there. Some wanted to be police officers, others teachers or doctors. David remained silent, absent-mindedly drawing on the floor with his finger. "And you, David, do you have a dream?" asked the psychologist, noticing his silence. David looked up, thoughtful. "I want to be a nurse," he replied, surprising himself. He had never thought of this before, but the words came out naturally. "A nurse, why?" "To help people when they're feeling sick, like what I did with that man downtown." A glimmer of curiosity appeared in Dr. Regina's eyes. "What man, David? Can you tell us what happened?" David hesitated, realizing he had never mentioned the incident since arriving there. He decided to share, hoping it might help explain why he was in that place. "A few days ago, I saw a man choking downtown in Boston. Nobody stopped to help. I had seen in a video how to do that maneuver of squeezing the stomach, so I did it on him. He passed out afterward, but he was breathing. Then the police came and took me away." The psychologist seemed genuinely impressed. "You saved his life, David. That was a very brave act, but I was treated like a criminal. Nobody wanted to hear what happened. They sent me to the shelter and then here, far from everything." Dr. Regina made some notes on her clipboard. "I understand your frustration. Many times the system fails to recognize acts of kindness, especially when they come from those whom society usually ignores. But know that what you did was extraordinary." After the session, while walking back to the dormitory, David was approached by Carl, one of the oldest caregivers at the institution. A man of almost 60, with grey hair and a generally severe expression. "I heard you in therapy," he said, surprising David with an almost conspiratorial tone. "This man you saved, do you know who he was?" David shook his head negatively. "He was Edward Barrett, owner of half of Boston Harbor, one of the richest men in Massachusetts." David's eyes widened. "How do you know?" "I saw it in the newspaper. They're saying he's looking for the boy who saved him. He's moving heaven and earth to find you, kid. David felt his heart race. Someone was looking for him. Someone important cared about his whereabouts. Then why are they hiding me here? Carl looked around, making sure no one was listening. Because there are powerful people who don't want this story to come to light. People who prefer that boys like you remain invisible. For the first time since arriving at that isolated place, David felt a spark of hope. If that rich man was really looking for him, perhaps there was a chance to get out of there, to finally be seen and heard. "What can I do?" he asked, his voice low but determined. Carl hesitated, as if weighing the risks of what he was about to suggest. "For now, nothing, just stay alert. Something tells me things are going to change soon." The conference room in Edward Barrett's office seemed too small to contain the energy emanating from him that morning. Present were Ralph Mendoza, the head of security, Louise Campbell, his trusted executive secretary, and, to the others' surprise, his ex-wife Christine Barrett, an investigative journalist for the Boston Daily. "We couldn't get authorization to visit New Dawn," began Ralph, spreading documents on the dark wooden table. "The institution claims we need a family connection or a court order. I tried some contacts, but they're all apprehensive. It seems there are higher orders to make access difficult." Edward drummed his fingers on the table, impatient. Who's protecting this place? Who has an interest in keeping this boy isolated? "From what I've discovered," Christine interjected, consulting her notes, "New Dawn receives substantial funds from the State Secretary of Social Development. The current secretary is August Mitchell, who coincidentally is a cousin of Dr. Simon Ventura." "And that's not all," added Ralph. "The institution was regularized through a social project approved 3 years ago in the state legislature. The main advocate was Representative Otto Graham, who is a VIP patient at St. Vincent's Clinic and had an experimental cancer treatment fully funded by the institution." Edward shook his head, disgusted. The picture forming was of a network of influence and mutual favors that protected dubious interests. How did I never notice this before? How did I never see this reality right under my nose? "Because it wasn't convenient to see," Christine replied, with the frankness that had always marked her relationship with her ex-husband. "The invisibility of these people is not accidental, Edward. It's a social project. Keeping them away from the eyes of those who have the power to change things is part of the system." A heavy silence hung over the room. Christine's words, though harsh, contained an undeniable truth. "Well, that changes today," declared Edward, standing up. "Louise, contact our lawyers. I want a judicial petition to visit New Dawn as a potential donor. Ralph, continue pressuring." "Your contacts, Christine. I think it's time we use the press." Christine raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Are you sure? Once this story becomes public, there's no going back." "Absolutely. I want you to write an article about how I was saved by a street boy and how I'm trying to find him to thank him. Don't mention my suspicions about Dr. Simon or the social cleansing scheme yet. Let's see what reactions we can provoke." Louise, who had been silently taking notes until then, raised her head. "Mr. Barrett, this could affect our business partnerships. St. Vincent's Clinic has connections with several of our investors." "I'm aware of the risks," he responded firmly. "But there are things more important than business. This boy risked everything to help me when no one else did. I won't abandon him." For the next morning, the Boston Daily headline caught attention. "Businessman searches for street boy who saved his life." The article, signed by Christine Barrett, recounted how Edward had been saved by a boy who performed the Heimlich maneuver when he choked downtown in Boston. It described Edward's fruitless search for the boy and his desire to repay the heroic gesture. The story quickly gained traction. Other outlets reproduced the news, radio programs commented on the case, and, on social media, the subject became one of the most discussed. Many praised the businessman's attitude, while others questioned why a street boy simply disappeared after performing a heroic act. At New Dawn, the news arrived in a fragmented way. The staff commented in hushed voices, trying not to let the children hear. Carl, the caregiver who had spoken with David days earlier, managed to see the full report during his break, using a colleague's cell phone. That afternoon, during math class, He discreetly slipped a piece of paper to David. "Read it when you're alone," he whispered. Hours later, hidden in the bathroom, David finally could read the message. "The man you saved is Edward Barrett. He's looking for you. The story is in the newspapers. Be careful what you say. I'll help if I can." David felt a mix of emotions. Relief to know he hadn't been completely forgotten. Hope that someone powerful was on his side. Fear of what might happen if those responsible for keeping him there discovered he knew. That night, lying in the bunk bed while other boys slept, David allowed himself for the first time in a long time to dream of a different future. In Dr. Simon Ventura's office, on the top floor of St. Vincent's Clinic, the atmosphere was one of palpable tension. The doctor paced back and forth, his normally calm face contorted into a mask of worry. "How did we let this happen?" he questioned, throwing the newspaper onto the desk. "Edward Barrett moving heaven and earth to find a street boy? This could ruin everything." Seated across from him, Mark Cardwell, administrative director of the clinic and longtime confidant, maintained his composure. "Calm down, Simon. The situation is under control. The boy is well guarded at New Dawn, away from the spotlight. For now. But Edward has resources, influence. If he discovers what we've done..." "He won't discover," Mark affirmed with a confidence he didn't really feel. "And even if he reaches the boy, it will be his word against ours. Who would believe a street boy?" Simon stopped pacing, staring at his partner. "You don't know Edward Barrett like I do. He may seem like a typical businessman, concerned only with profits, but he has this irritating moral sense. Once he takes on a cause, he doesn't give up." "Then maybe it's time to offer him another cause," suggested Mark, a calculating smile forming on his lips. "I have an idea." 3 days after the publication of the report, Edward received an unexpected visit in his office. Dr. Simon Ventura, accompanied by the State Secretary of Social Development, August Mitchell. "Edward, my friend, good to see you recovered," exclaimed Simon, as if nothing unusual was happening. Edward maintained a neutral expression, indicating the chairs in front of him. "Simon, Secretary Mitchell, to what do I owe the honor?" The visitors sat down, Simon adjusting his tie in a nervous gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Edward. "We saw the report about your search for the boy who helped you," began the doctor. "A touching story, really. Thank you. Too bad no one at your clinic wanted to help me find him." Simon's smile faltered for an instant. "There was a misunderstanding, Edward. In the confusion of the moment, with your health at risk, some details may have been more omitted, but we're here to correct that." Secretary Mitchell leaned forward, assuming an officious tone. "Mr. Barrett, we've located the young man in question. He's in one of our care institutions, receiving all the necessary attention." Edward raised his eyebrows, feigning surprise. "That's great. When can I see him?" The two visitors exchanged quick glances. "Well, there are protocols to be followed," explained Mitchell. "Minors under state guardianship have the right to privacy and protection. But we've brought a proposal that we believe will benefit everyone." Simon quickly opened a folder and extended some documents. "Edward, New Dawn, the institution where the boy is, urgently needs renovations and expansion. Secretary Mitchell suggested a public-private partnership. If your companies finance the project, we can ensure that the boy receives quality education, medical and psychological monitoring, everything he needs for a promising future." Edward examined the documents, maintaining a neutral expression while his stomach churned with indignation. It was a blatant attempt to buy his silence, to transform his search for justice into just another corporate charity project that would only serve to maintain the status quo. "Interesting," he responded, closing the folder. "And when can I meet the boy? I'd like to thank him personally before making any commitment." Once again, the secretary and the doctor exchanged uncomfortable looks. "Unfortunately, visits are restricted. Institution policy to protect minors," Mitchell replied, "but we can provide a letter written by him, perhaps a video." "I see," said Edward, standing up to indicate the end of the meeting. "I'll analyze the proposal carefully. Thank you for the visit." As soon as the visitors left, Edward called Ralph. "They took the bait. Now we know for sure where David is. Prepare the legal team. We're going to need a court injunction, and fast." New dawn, David's routine was suddenly altered. Called to the director's office, a middle-aged woman with an artificial smile, he received surprising news. "David, dear, we have wonderful news. You've been selected for a special education program. Tomorrow you'll be transferred to another institution, even better than this one in Hartford." David frowned, suspicious. "Why me? Why so far?" The director maintained her smile, but her eyes hardened. "Don't question your good fortune, boy. Many would like to have this opportunity." Returning to the dormitory, David found Carl in the E's corridor. "They're sending me to Hartford tomorrow," he whispered hastily. The caregiver looked alarmed. "They're trying to move you even further away. Edward Barrett must be getting close." "What should I do?" Carl looked around, making sure they were alone. "Tomorrow during breakfast, there will be confusion in the kitchen. A small accident. Use that chance to go to the back gate. It will be unlocked for 5 minutes between 7:55 and 8 Fang. After that, follow the dirt road for 2 kilometers to the bus stop. Someone will be waiting for you." "Who?" "Better you don't know in case you're caught. Just trust it's your only chance." That night, David could hardly sleep. His heart alternated between hope and fear. What if it was a trap? What if Carl was just testing his loyalty? But then again, what was the alternative? Being sent even further away, where perhaps he would never be found. He decided to take the risk. After all, surviving on the streets of Boston had taught him that sometimes you have to trust the improbable when all the safe options are exhausted. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon when David woke up that Wednesday. Not that he had slept much. He'd spent most of the night in a state of semi-consciousness, his body tense, his mind recapping every detail of the escape plan. Around him, the other boys were still sleeping soundly. The digital clock on the dormitory wall read 5:47. There were still more than 2 hours until the decisive moment. David sat on the edge of the bed, trying to control his accelerated breathing. He didn't have many belongings to take, just a change of clothes and a small notebook, where he scribbled drawings in moments of boredom. He stored everything in a plastic bag and hid it under the mattress. Raising suspicions before the time could ruin everything. At 7 o'clock, the institution's bell rang, announcing the beginning of another day. The boys woke up lazily, complaining and stretching. David pretended to do the same, although every fiber of his body was alert. "Good morning, everyone," greeted the on-duty educator entering the dormitory. "Time for showers and breakfast. Especially you, David. The director wants you ready at 9 a.m. for the transfer." David nodded, avoiding looking directly at the man. In the communal bathroom during his shower, he allowed himself a few seconds of doubt. What if the special opportunity in Hartford was legitimate? What if he was throwing away a real chance for improvement? But then he remembered the director's condescending tone, the coincidence of the transfer just when his name appeared. In the newspapers, Carl's urgent warning. No, this wasn't an opportunity. It was an attempt to bury him even deeper, away from the eyes of those who could really help him. At 7:45, the boys formed the usual line for breakfast. David discreetly retrieved his bag of belongings, hiding it under his shirt. His heart was beating so hard that he was sure everyone could hear it. Upon entering the cafeteria, he looked for Carl, but the caregiver was nowhere to be seen. Did he give up? He thought, feeling a wave of panic. Did he deceive me? He sat at the designated table, trying to disguise his nervousness as he ate the buttered bread and drank the warm milk. The minutes seemed to drag. 7:50, 7:52, 7:53. "Hey, David," called Tyler, sitting across from him. "I heard you're going to Hartford today. Lucky you, huh?" David shrugged, not trusting his own voice, to respond. "Third force." Suddenly, a deafening crash came from the kitchen, followed by shouts. Dense smoke began to spread through the cafeteria. The next instant, the fire alarm went off, and widespread confusion set in. "Everyone in line! Exit in order!" shouted Orr, one of the educators trying to organize the frightened children. Amidst the chaos, David saw Carl emerge from the smoke. The caregiver made a discreet gesture toward the back door. It was the signal. While everyone headed for the main exit, David took advantage of the confusion to slip into the side corridor. With his heart in his throat, he ran crouched until, reaching the back door, As promised, it was unlocked. Without looking back, he launched himself outside the institution. The fresh morning air filled his lungs, bringing a momentary sensation of freedom. But there was no time for celebrations. He needed to follow the plan. Running as fast as his legs allowed, David reached the fence that marked the back of the property. There, as Carl had said, he found a discreet opening, sufficient for him to pass through. Slipping through, he was finally outside New Dawn. In front of him stretched a cornfield that seemed endless. The dirt road he should follow was just a dusty track cutting through the green sea of corn. Without thinking twice, he began to run. That same morning, 120 kilometers away, Edward Barrett was fighting his own battle. At the Boston courthouse, accompanied by a team of 3 lawyers, he awaited the judge's decision on his request to visit New Dawn. "Mr. Barrett," called one of the lawyers, approaching with a worried expression. "I just received a call from our contact. It seems they're planning to transfer the boy David today to another institution in Hartford." Edward felt his blood boil. "They're always one step ahead. How did they discover our judicial movement? Someone in the court office must have leaked the information. The important thing now is to get this injunction before the transfer happens." At that moment, the judge's secretary appeared in the corridor. "Mr. Edward Barrett, Judge Eliza will see you now." Edward entered the courtroom. With renewed determination, Judge Eliza Montgomery, a middle-aged black woman known for her integrity, indicated the chair in front of her. "Mr. Barrett, I've read your request carefully. I must say it's a quite unusual situation." "Thank you for receiving me, Your Honor. As you must have read, I'm trying to find the boy who saved my life. I discovered he's at New Dawn, but they're making access difficult and now they're trying to hastily transfer him." The judge leafed through the documents in front of her. "I have here the reports from the institution. They claim the transfer is part of a special education program for the minors' benefit. With all due respect, Your Honor, that's a farce. They're trying to hide this boy because he's living proof of a social cleansing scheme that has been going on for years in Boston." The judge raised her eyebrows, interested. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Barrett. Do you have evidence?" Edward signaled to one of the lawyers, who promptly handed over a folder. "These are records of suspicious transfers of minors in street situations, all found in the vicinity of St. Vincent's Clinic. There are also testimonies from Child Protective Services employees who were pressured to expedite removals without following the proper protocols." The judge examined the documents in silence for a few minutes. Finally, she looked up. "I'll grant the injunction for you to visit New Dawn today, accompanied by a court officer and a representative from the district attorney's office. As for the transfer, it's suspended until the facts are clarified." Edward felt immediate relief. "Thank you, Your Honor." "Don't thank me yet, Mr. Barrett. If your suspicions are confirmed, we'll have a serious case of abuse of power and rights violation. But if you're mistaken, you'll be held responsible for defamation." "I fully understand the risks," Edward replied, standing up, "and I'm willing to assume them." Upon leaving the courthouse, Edward received a call from Ralph Mendoza. "Boss, we have a problem. I received information that there was a fire at New Dawn this morning." "My God, was anyone hurt?" "Apparently not. It was just in the kitchen. Quickly controlled. But during the confusion, the boy David disappeared." Edward stopped in the middle of the courthouse steps, astonished. "What do you mean disappeared? He ran away?" "It seems so. They're searching the region, but so far nothing." Edward closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process the information. On one hand, the boy was away from the clutches of those trying to hide him. On the other, he was alone, in an isolated rural area, without resources or protection. "Ralph, gather a team. We're heading there immediately." David had been running for almost 20 minutes when his lungs began to burn and his legs to weaken. Reducing the pace to a fast walk, he tried to stay oriented. The sun, now higher in the sky, served as a reference. Carl had said to follow the road for 2 kilometers, but how far would that be exactly? Suddenly he heard the roar of an engine. He turned and saw a pickup truck approaching on the dirt road. Panicking, he threw himself between the rows of corn, hiding as best he could. The pickup passed straight by, leaving only a cloud of dust behind. David waited a few seconds before coming out of hiding. Upon returning to the road, he spotted something that made his heart leap. About 100 meters ahead, a small wooden shelter marked the rural bus stop mentioned by Carl. Feeling exposed, on the open road, David ran the last meters to the shelter. To his surprise and disappointment, there was no one waiting for him, just a worn wooden bench and a paper with bus schedules posted on the wall. "Did I misunderstand?" he murmured to himself, discouraged. The next bus to the nearest town would only pass in 2 hours, according to the paper. He sat on the bench, trying to decide what to do. Going back was out of the question. Continuing on foot would mean hours under the scorching sun, without water or food. Waiting for the bus seemed risky. Surely the institution had already noticed his absence and initiated searches. A subtle noise caught his attention. Their car was approaching slowly, an old and dusty model. David prepared to run again, but something about the vehicle made him hesitate. Unlike the previous pickup, this one seemed almost stealthy, as if it didn't want to be noticed. The car stopped next to the shelter. The passenger window rolled down, revealing the face of a woman approximately 30 years old. "David?" she called in a low voice. The boy took a step back, distrustful. "Who are you?" "My name is Marianne. Carl asked me to come pick you up." "You need to get in quickly. It's not safe to stay here." David remained motionless, torn between the fear of the unknown and the fear of being captured. "How do I know I can trust you?" The woman smiled gently. "Carl said you'd like to be a nurse someday. That's what you told in the therapy session." That information could only have come from Carl. Still hesitant, but without many alternatives, David got into the car. "Where are we going?" he asked, as the vehicle returned to the road in the opposite direction from New Dawn. "To Boston. There's someone there very anxious to meet you." At New Dawn, chaos had set in. Firefighters were completing the final procedures in the kitchen affected by the small fire, while staff and police searched the property for David. The director, visibly disturbed, gave contradictory orders, increasing the confusion. When her cell phone rang, she moved away to answer it, her expression becoming even more somber with each second of the conversation. "What do you mean, a court injunction? Who authorized that?" she questioned, her voice trembling. "No, we haven't found the boy yet. We believe he took advantage of the tumult to escape." On the other end of the line, Dr. Simon Ventura could barely contain his fury. "You had one job, Marcy, one job. Keep that boy away from the spotlight, and now he's missing, just when Edward Barrett gets authorization to visit him. It was an accident in the kitchen no one could have predicted. Accident or sabotage, who was on duty in the kitchen today?" "Carl Oliver, but he's a long-time employee, never caused problems." A heavy silence settled on the line. "Find that boy, Marcy. Find him before Edward Barrett does, or we'll all have much to lose." The director hung up, feeling the weight of the veiled threat. As she turned, she came face to face with Carl, who was observing her from a distance with a neutral expression. "Carl," she called, trying to maintain her composure. "We need to talk about the fire in the kitchen." The caregiver approached calmly. "Of course, Director, it was very strange. The gas tank seemed to have been tampered with." "Tampered with? By whom?" Carl shrugged. "Who would have an interest in creating a distraction? Perhaps someone who didn't want a certain boy to be transferred far away today." The director's eyes narrowed. "You know where he is, don't you?" "Me? How could I know? I was too busy trying to put out the fire." At that moment, a commotion formed at the entrance of the institution. Several official cars were approaching, including a district attorney's office vehicle and a luxury car that the director immediately recognized as belonging to Edward Barrett. "They're here," murmured Carl, a slight smile forming on his lips, "and it seems they have many questions." The director felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The scheme carefully constructed over years, the suspicious transfers, the political favors, everything seemed about to collapse. "What have you done, Carl?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible. "Just what should have been done a long time. Ergo, I gave an invisible child the chance to finally be seen. Christine Barrett's office at the Boston Daily was buzzing with activity. Reporters came and went, phones wouldn't stop ringing, and in the center of this whirlwind, seated on a worn leather sofa, David observed everything with wide eyes. Marianne, the woman who had rescued him from the bus stop, remained by his side, a reassuring presence amid the chaos. "Have some water," offered Christine, extending a glass. "You must be exhausted after everything you've been through." David accepted, still trying to process the events of the last few hours. The escape from New Dawn, the nearly 2-hour journey to Boston, and now he was there in a newspaper office surrounded by people who seemed genuinely interested in his well-being. "When will I meet the man I saved?" he asked, after taking a sip of water. Christine smiled, sitting in a chair across from him. "Edward is on his way. He went to New Dawn with authorities to investigate the situation, but he's already been informed that you're safe here. He should arrive in about an hour." "Hey," young reporter approached hurriedly. "Christine, the story is exploding. All the TV stations are asking for interviews, and Dr. Simon Ventura has just issued a statement denying any involvement in the boy's disappearance." "Disappearance?" Christine laughed without humor. "How interesting. He didn't disappear. He was deliberately hidden." Turning to David, she assumed a softer tone. "David, I know you've been through a lot today, but we need to know. Are you willing to tell your story? Everything that's happened since the day you saved." "Edward?" The boy looked at Marianne, who nodded encouragingly. "I can, yes, but won't it bring me problems? The director of New Dawn, Dr. Simon, they seem to be powerful people." "They were," Christine corrected. "The truth, especially when it comes to light this way, has a transformative power. And you're not alone in this fight." At that moment, the door of the newsroom opened, and Ralph Mendoza entered, followed by Carl, the caregiver from New Dawn. David immediately stood up, running to hug the man who had made his escape possible. "Carl, you managed to get out of there." The caregiver returned the hug, visibly moved. "Yes, my young friend. When Mr. Barrett arrived with the authorities, I realized it was time to tell everything I know. Years of suspicious transfers, children removed from the streets just to clean up the city's image. I kept records, dates, names, everything I could document without raising suspicions." Ralph stepped forward, extending his hand to Christine. "Carl is our main witness. The district attorney's office has already initiated procedures for a formal investigation." The journalist shook Carl's hand with admiration. "Thank you for your courage. Not everyone would have risked so much." The caregiver shrugged, embarrassed. "I worked in that place for almost 8 years. I saw many injustices being committed in the name of social good. There came a point when I could no longer remain silent." The commotion in the newsroom suddenly increased. All eyes turned to the entrance, where Edward Barrett had just appeared. Tall, with grey hair at the temples and a determined expression, he scanned the environment with his gaze until finding David. For a moment, the two simply stared at each other. The 12-year-old boy, thin and in simple clothes, and the middle-aged businessman in his impeccable suit. Two realities that should never have crossed paths in an America of social chasms, united by an act of courage. Edward crossed the room and, to everyone's surprise, knelt in front of David, coming to his height. "So it's you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. The boy who didn't hesitate to help a stranger when everyone around continued indifferent. David, not knowing how to react, just nodded. "I did what anyone would do," he murmured. "No, David, you did what few would do. And for that, you ended up being punished by a system that prefers to keep people like you invisible." Edward extended his hand, which David timidly shook. "Thank you for saving my life, and I'm sorry for everything you went through after that." In the weeks that followed, the story of David and Edward dominated the Massachusetts news and soon gained national repercussion. The investigative report signed by Christine Barrett, detailing the social cleansing scheme that had been operating for years in Boston, was nominated for journalism awards and triggered a series of similar investigations in other American cities. Dr. Simon Ventura, initially adamant in his denials, found himself cornered when more witnesses emerged with evidence of his involvement. The Secretary of Social Development, August Mitchell, asked to be relieved of his post for personal reasons. Representative Otto Graham announced he would not run for re-election. For David, however, the most significant changes were in his personal life. After hearings with judges from the juvenile court, it was decided that he would remain under the provisional guardianship of a foster family while his case was evaluated. To his surprise, Edward and Christine Barrett, though divorced for years, jointly presented themselves as candidates for foster family. After a rigorous evaluation process and considering the bond already established, the judge authorized David to live with Edward, with regular visits from Christine. 6 months after the fateful day of the rescue, David walked the corridors of Academy Prep School, one of the most prestigious schools in Boston. Attending an educational institution of that level still seemed surreal for someone who, until recently, could barely feed himself daily. "Hey, David, ready for the science test?" asked Lucas, a classmate who had become his friend. "Almost. I still need to review the chapter on the respiratory system," he replied, adjusting his backpack on his shoulder. Upon leaving school that afternoon, he found Edward waiting in the car. "How was your day?" asked the businessman as he drove through the tree-lined streets of the neighborhood. "Normal. I had a Portuguese test. I think I did well." Edward smiled, proud. David's adaptation to his new life hadn't been easy. There were nightmares, anxiety attacks, moments of distrust. But each day the boy demonstrated admirable resilience. "I have a surprise for you," announced Edward, changing the usual route. Minutes later, they parked in front of a modern building downtown. On the facade, a sign indicated David Smith, Community Center, Support for Children and Adolescents in Vulnerable Situations. "Ready?" asked Edward, seeing the boy's astonished expression. This has my name." "Yes, and it's not just the name. We want you to actively participate in the project, sharing your experiences, helping to define priorities. Who better than you to understand what these children really need?" David got out of the car, observing the building with a mixture of emotion and incredulity. At the entrance, Christine was waiting for him, alongside Carl, who had been hired as coordinator of the center after his crucial testimony in the case of the transfer scheme. "What did you think?" asked Christine as they walked through the newly inaugurated space. "It was Edward's idea, but we all contributed to the project. The center had classrooms, psychological care, legal guidance, and even a basic clinic. On the walls, photographs of children in street situations, taken by an award-winning photojournalist, humanized those whom society usually ignored." It's incredible," David replied, still processing the magnitude of the project. "But why my name? I didn't do anything special." Edward placed his hand on his shoulder. "You did much more than you imagined, David. Not only did you save a life, but you triggered changes that will benefit many others. Your story showed us that the invisibility imposed on so many American children isn't inevitable. It's a choice made by society, and we can make different choices." In the main hall of the center, a team of young social educators was receiving training. Upon seeing David, they interrupted their activity to applaud. The boy, unaccustomed to being the center of attention in a positive way, felt his face burn with embarrassment. "No need to be embarrassed," Christine whispered. "You deserve every applause." Later, in a small official inauguration ceremony, David was invited to say a few words. Reluctantly, he approached the microphone. I don't know how to make speeches," he began, his voice trembling. "A few months ago, I was just another invisible boy on the streets of Boston. No one looked at me. No one cared if I had eaten or where I would sleep. Then one day I saw someone needing help and I did what I could. I wasn't expecting anything in return, much less all this." He paused, seeking the right words. "There are many others like me still out there. Children who just need a chance. Someone who truly sees them. This center isn't about me. It's about making visible what many prefer not to see." The audience, moved, applauded at length. Edward, observing from the side, felt a mixture of pride and hope. The journey that had begun with an act of desperation, when he choked that morning downtown, had transformed into something much greater than he could have imagined. A month later, David officially began his volunteer work at the center, dedicating a few hours weekly to talk with children newly arrived from the streets. His story, now known throughout Boston, served as inspiration, but it was his genuine empathy that really made a difference. "Do you think you really managed to change something?" asked Tyler, his former colleague from New Dawn, who had also benefited from the investigations and now lived with a foster family. David reflected before answering, looking through the center's window at the busy street where he once wandered in search of survival. "I don't know if I changed the world, but I know my world changed. And maybe that's a beginning. One person at a time, one glance at a time." Outside, Edward observed the scene with Christine, both contemplating how their lives had been transformed by a boy who, against all odds, refused to remain invisible. "You know what impresses me most?" commented Christine. "How he keeps his feet on the ground even after everything." "It's because he never forgot where he came from," Edward replied, "and that makes all the difference in the man he's becoming." The story of David and Edward would continue inspiring many in the years that followed, not just for the dramatic rescue or the scandal it unveiled, but for the powerful reminder that true social change begins when we allow ourselves to